Hello, Brad here, just to say we're super proud that the Friday 5pm podcast is sponsored by the Malt Miller, the UK's best home brew store.
We use the Malt Miller for all of our homebrew experiments, as well as tapping them up for advice and binging on their awesome YouTube channel all the time.
That's why whenever we release a homebrew video, we put a recipe kit live on the Malt Miller, so you can brew with the exact same amazing ingredients that we did. The same ingredients used by pro brewers.
So alongside the Malt Miller's nitro-flushed hops, cold-stored yeast and milled-to-order malts, you can pick up recipe kits for our 5 Points Best Bitter, Russian River West Coast IPA, and now the fastest beer in the world, a hazy session IPA that goes from grain to glass in less than 48 hours.
Sign up to their newsletter at tinyurl.com/Malt Miller to get 5% off your first order. With the Malt Miller's amazing customer service and Johnny's 48-hour recipe, you could order the ingredients on a Monday and be drinking the beer by the weekend.
Speaking of which, it's Friday.
It's 5pm.
So enjoy this week's Friday 5pm podcast. Hey everyone, welcome to The Bubble. I realise it's definitely not a monthly podcast. We've fallen back off the wagon pretty hard.
COVID.
There.
It's COVID, Johnny.
It's still COVID.
Happens.
Yeah.
We're very much COVID.
I mean, this was a digitally recorded podcast, so it's a lean excuse.
We're dealing with the fallout of COVID, though. No drivers to drive our guests around.
Ferry the tapes that we use to record.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, everything's in turmoil, so the fact that we haven't stuck to a month this time, listeners, you cannot be angry.
Nope. It's not allowed. But you'll be pleased to know that we're back with a bang and a very exciting episode. One that when we were plotting The Bubble before it was properly conceived and put out into the world was one I really wanted to do, which is all about video games. So when I was a teen, I was massively into massively multiplayer online role-playing games, or the Murmurporgs. And I got obsessed with those and was always in my room, and I was a bit of a sort of a specky teenager kind of vibe.
Never, Johnny. I don't believe you.
Who'd have seen that coming? And then I totally fell out of love with games until Red Dead 2 came along, and I was like, I have to be a cowboy now in my early 30s.
I mean, I was the exact same. I wouldn't say a huge gamer, and I've talked about it in the past, but I did love Tony Hawk's when I was but a lad. Absolutely played it to death. And then got into Call of Duty a little bit, circa 2002? No, or later than that, 2006. And then that was it. And then I've rekindled my love after I got a Nintendo Switch and have played far too many hours of Zelda Breath of the Wild.
I did have a Wii as well at university. And we used to just get very, very drunk and play Wii tennis. I think that's about the only game we did play on it. But the tactileness of those games, I think got a lot of casual gamers back into it.
Yeah, but it was amazing to talk to people about the sort of new era of gaming. I think for us, we're very much like the old school, like as Peter talks about in this, that we think game starts, complete boss, game ends. But gaming's changed.
Yeah, it really had, like everything in the world, it's completely polarized. So obviously you've got these massive blockbuster ones which take more than a film production company to put together, and years and years and years, and lots of exploitation of workers, as we'll get into. And then on the other side, you've got these small indie games producers who are making incredibly niche, much lower budget stuff where the focus is on the detail, the technicalities, particular passions, which is kind of a bit crafty, really. It's like you've got the big budget stuff that's happening in the mainstream, and then underneath it, this current of, weirdos, recluses.
Yeah, grassroots.
Grassroots.
Doing it for the love.
That's probably a better euphemism for it. But yeah, so the parallels with beer are definitely there, and we tease into that with our guests today, who are Auroch Digital, Peter and Eren. The reason we picked them is, and I explained it slightly in the actual interview, but I was on Twitter on April Fool's Day, and PlayStation 4 tweeted about a game called Brewmaster, like a homebrew game, and I was like, that's a very niche April Fool joke, PlayStation 4. I can't believe you're trolling the beer nerds. And it turns out they weren't. It was a real thing made by these guys, Auroch Digital, based in Bristol. So I reached out and was like, hey, we're a beer channel and a podcast. Do you want to have a chat about this bonkers idea? And Peter and I spoke on the phone, and he was telling me all about like the wild success of these hobbyist games. In particular, there's one that's huge. I forget the name of it, but truck driving, where you just literally drive a truck.
Yeah,
and
I've seen it.
Millions and millions of copies sold. And it was sort of a world that I did not know existed, and that this particular game's going to exist in.
So what's amazing is you wanted to do a gaming episode, and not only that, it's linked to beer in a less tedious way than usual.
There you go, a less tedious episode than usual. I couldn't have put it better. So yeah, this is Peter and Eren from Auroch Digital, and we'll see you at the end to play around with what they said.
I love that stuff. Been drinking it for years. Drinking it for years. Drinking it for years. Drinking it for years. You know, I heard they recently decided to add more hops to it. You know, I heard they recently decided to add more hops to it.
So thanks for joining us, Peter and Eren, on The Bubble. It's been a while since we did an episode, but it's one that we've been pushing. It's been like the cursed podcast that could never happen with so many reschedules. But yeah, thank you for joining us. I guess we should start by learning like your guys' backgrounds, and then we'll get into Brewmasters.
Well, I'll let Eren start, actually.
Oh, okay. So my background is in 3D art. So before I was with Auroch, I was working in flight simulators, which is obviously quite a different change. But yeah, no, since I've been with Auroch, I've been working as a senior artist on Brewmasters. It's been absolutely wonderful. And yeah, any questions about 3D? That's always going to be... I could talk for hours about that. So...
Sure. So my name is Peter Willington. I'm one of the producers here at the studio. I've been working on Brewmaster for a couple of years now. 2019, I think we came up with the idea, maybe late 2018, that kind of thing. So I've been with it from the start. And as a producer, it's my job to hog all of the glory of all the very talented people that work with me. And that's basically my role.
You just make sure your name's first on the credits.
Exactly that, yeah.
So why don't you tell us about the project that you're working on right now then? So where did Brewmasters come from as a concept, and what's the aim of it?
So Brewmaster is a hobby simulation game, a first-person hobby simulation game. And this is kind of this genre that we're starting to see come out of video games. So think along the lines of things like PC Building Simulator, Woodworking Simulator, those kinds of high quality simulation games that simulate a facet of real life in a digital space. So it's not things like Flight Sim, it's not things like DCS and stuff like that, things that Eren's very, very aware of. We don't have Gatwick in our game. But it's also not one of those kind of throwaway, jokey simulation games that you get and you see they're always constantly in bundles, and they're a bit sort of £3 to kind of, I don't know. Yeah, they're not these kind of like jokey. It's not a meme-based joke game. This is a fairly takes itself fairly seriously beer game where you are a home brewer and you brew beer in the perfect brewing space. So we've given you this kind of like converted barn, and you essentially can brew the kinds of beers that you want to brew. The idea started a little bit after we released a game that did critically really like pretty well for us, but commercially just kind of was like kind of okay. And we kind of got thinking as a team, like why is it that like we made a game that was like well received but with a small audience? We kind of got to thinking like, well, like is it that we just don't know that the audience is there? Are we making games for a market that's just not there? And so we started to think about, well, we like food, we like drink. Okay, is there a game in that? And we sort of thought, oh, maybe we could make like Theme Hospital but beer, right? Like that kind of management layer kind of thing. And then we were like,
I would love that, by the way.
Yeah, I'm sure. Some people have been saying to us, oh, you should. So that game already exists, and like it did like okay, like, and we were like, oh, that's a shame, like. So we got thinking, well, but we do like this idea of beer, and we found this like really big audience for it, because obviously craft beer was kind of it had already gone through the first big like peak in the sort of mid 2000s, and in around 2018, 2019, when we were starting to think about this, I think craft beer's really properly fully there then. And we saw that there was an audience there, and we also realised that, hey, some of us really like beer. I will say, not me. I'd never really gotten into beer before any of this stuff. So we started to research it a bit, and we came up with this idea of a first-person simulation game that was based on real chemistry. So the idea is not that you take a block and a block, like in Minecraft, put them together and that's a chair, right? It's not like that kind of abstracted kind of simulation. This is, okay, so you take this kind of yeast and you take these kinds of hops, these kinds of malts, you take all of that, you have this water that is, this uniform water, and you put those put those different ingredients together, and then chemistry happens. So obviously the yeast is chewing away at the sugars, CO2 is getting created, the water's evaporating due to the heat in the room. Different temperatures are affecting the different whether or not the hops are actually like used in kind of bittering, or whether or not they're kind of used in more flavorful, more aroma kind of stuff, and when they go in is obviously really important. So it's this chemical simulation. We thought, well, let's give it a shot, and we started to make it, and so we decided to kind of go with that, and lo and behold, that's your game. So
I came across this game on Twitter. I think it was PS4 mentioned it as an upcoming game.
Yeah.
And I think I saw it on April Fool's.
Yeah.
Which was when they announced it, and the whole beer geek community that I was part of was like, this is a joke,
for
right?
Us? Yeah.
So was that the reaction you saw as well? Or were you surprised that people are like, this can't be a game?
It was really interesting. It was a really interesting time for us because 50% of the community seemed to go, like, if this is an April Fool's, I would actually quite like this. And then 50% of the community was like, beer? If you can make the beers but you can't drink them, what's the point? So it was a really interesting kind of reaction that we got there. The Sony blog kind of blew up for us, which was really, really awesome. It was really lovely that Sony kind of have faith in the product. So yeah, it was really cool. And then we got a load of feedback, and there's the old people who are just kind of like, well, I just don't see the point, when I can homebrew myself. And the response we always have is like, that's great, that's really cool that you're homebrewing. The whole point of what we're making is to get people into homebrewing and understand what homebrewing is about. So yeah, it's not for you. It's that kind of thing of like, if it's not the kind of thing, it's like, oh, I'd rather have the end product at the end of it. We basically are just like, yeah, well then go for it. Like, if I can fly a Cessna in real life, I'm probably not going to do it in flight sim, am I? Yeah.
I was wondering, is there a move in sort of gaming towards these like info-based games where people can learn? Because especially for younger people, it allows them, as you say, to sort of dip their toe in certain activities that there's like no other way they would be able to do it. And have you noticed a big change in that?
Yeah, so basically, there certainly is. Like, so we make a lot of games that are that have an element of real world about it. So one of our previous own IP releases is a game called Mars Horizon. That was a game that was about running a space agency, and it's based on real science. We actually worked with the European Space Agency. It was the first game I think they'd ever worked on, which was an amazing learning experience for us and for them. Getting to go and see literally things communicating with satellites, having conversations with people who looked at their mobile phone while I was having a coffee with him, and he was like, yeah, my probe's reached Mars, and then continued on. Like just kind of wonderful stuff like that. And yeah, there's certainly like an education element to it, like learning. But I would say it's much more in the Gran Turismo, Assassin's Creed. You learn what a Subaru Impreza and what ancient Italy is like through kind of osmosis, rather than like Mario is missing or Luigi's lost or Zelda teaches typing or whatever it was. It's nothing like that. It's not an edutainment title in that way.
So, Eren, were you in on this project from the start, or did you come in a little later?
Very late. In fact, I've only been with the company for, I think I'm coming up to 3 months.
Yep.
In a week. So I'm very new to the project. I've very much come in as we've sort of got way further into it. So I didn't really see all of those initial decisions. But if anything, that's been more interesting, because it's been great being able to talk to people who are like, oh, this is why we're doing this. This is why we've made this decision. But the best part about it is that if I turn around and I'm like, maybe this would look cool though, that is completely fine. So it's been a really good opportunity to sort of learn something new as well. Because I have had an interest in craft beer, not sort of homebrew, but just in general craft beer from before this. But it wasn't extensive on any level. It was more like I know I like Siren Craft. Siren Craft is right next to where I live. Let's go there. Let's go to a brewery tour. So I've done that style of stuff. But it's been really sort of fascinating actually learning all this stuff whilst creating the 3D art for it. Because I couldn't have told you what a warp plate chiller is a couple of months ago.
And now you know it intricately. Yeah.
Now I can make one. So I'm very much new, and I think there's been benefits to that. I would have loved to have been there for the first bit, but it's been really enjoyable anyway.
Yeah.
What's it like to go from, like, you've gone from, if you're working on flight sims, from having great panoramas to sort of design and turn into 3D, and then you've got a first person one that's probably mostly liquid based, a lot of animations of liquids doing different things. And
it's been a bit crazy. I think the biggest difference for me personally was going from having to make things at a really, really low, like the number of faces we can have on flight sim stuff is absolutely abysmal. It is so small. And I would have to make entire airports and stuff like that, and like landscape stuff from absolutely tiny things. And I've come into this, and I think the first thing I was told was, oh, don't worry so much about the poly count. And that was really strange, because going from very much third person to very, very close first person with half the assets, with an engine that can handle stuff, because not going to go into it, but flight sim engines do not like anything. They're very, very, very moody engines. But it's been really, really strange and very freeing as an artist in the weirdest way possible. I personally haven't done any of the liquid simulations, but Dan, the person that does on our team, is absolutely amazing at them, and it has been crazy watching him.
Yeah, I should actually talk a little bit about those liquids, because I think there's one thing that's not quite coming across in the videos that we've released so far for the game. So one of the ways that the liquids work in our game is, in a lot of games I should say, is like a particle effect. And this is essentially like an image that is just kind of like spawned over and over again. You can't really do a lot with, particle effects in terms of like, you're quite limited and constricted by it. And it doesn't particularly look real. It looks like bad video game liquid from back in the day, like that PS2, PS3 era of like, okay, this is fine.
It looks more like ice than water.
Sure, that kind of thing, right. It's kind of like, you see this with, so you'll see this in some games where like they have to have something pouring, so they'll use like a canned animation and then some particle effects over the top of it, and it's like, oh, hooray. And that's fine, because that's not their bread and butter, as it were, whereas with our game it definitely is. With our game, what we have is essentially what's called a dynamic mesh, and the idea is that when you turn the container, the liquid will literally calculate how wide the spout should be, what the water should be doing at this point. So when you're actually pouring, it is completely dynamically generated in that way. And that's why the liquids, when you see them in, because we've been posting about them on our socials and stuff like that, when you see those things moving, that's why it properly looks like actual liquid. And it's stuff that is, because it's very computationally heavy, it's something that a lot of video games just generally tend not to do. It's also cost us months and months of work. So I'm glad that it's just about paying off, because it's really complicated stuff.
When I play, I'm really going to appreciate the pouring of.
You're going to go, oh, that's a lovely pour.
Peter, you mentioned at the beginning that like weren't that into beer when the concept was spawned. Did you get external people in to help with the sort of coming up with the concept and sort of so you get it right?
So I guess there's kind of two parts to that. So initially, no, we didn't. So what I tend to do as a producer is go and do research. And obviously, this is a pretty good subject to research. So I kind of went into this thinking all beer kind of tastes the same. Like, I didn't really know anything about it. And I went down to a little bottle shop that's literally just next to me called Corks of Cotton. And they're very, very good. And I walked in and I went up to the nice lady behind the desk and I said, I don't know anything about beer. Please give me 5 beers that would be good. And she went, all right. And so got all these different beers out. And I was like, right, brilliant. I'll take them home. Whatever. It's however much money it is. If I don't like these, it's fine. I'll go back to Foster's or wherever it was I would drink if I had to have that stuff. And then realised, I was like, oh, it's super varied. And now I'm on unique beer 285, according to my Untapped. There
you go. You're all in once you're on Untapped.
Exactly right. I saw your video the other day, and I was just like, yeah. It really is so good for like just keeping a record of what you've tried. So since August 2019, that's the number of uniques I've managed to try. I've got really into it. So the team, when we studied at the very beginning of all of this, a whole bunch of the team that did the pre-production work went and got Cicerone Beer Savvy certified.
Oh, blimey,
yeah. So it's that entry level qualification, but you still need to know all the bits and pieces. So we went. Basically, a bunch of us just did that for a week. We just went and studied for a week. I've gone on beer tasting tours, and a whole bunch of different people have done the same. Been reading a whole bunch of different books from different people.
Now's your time to plug, Johnny.
It is because obviously, I read yours. I think I sent you an email about it saying, it was really good. I think I listened to the audiobook.
Oh my god, really? With they didn't tell us they were doing that audiobook, and they picked the weirdest voice that couldn't have sounded less like me if you tried.
Yeah, I was a little bit like,
we're going on a journey. Like, what the fuck is this guy?
Oh, it was a very epic journey though, wasn't it? In that voice. Lots and lots of research, lots of going and look at some of the classics like Michael Jackson stuff and Randy Mosher's stuff, like How to Homebrew 2nd edition from Mosher was really, really just so inspiring. We just did tons and tons and tons of research, and in fact, actually, at the very beginning of all of this, it was Craft Beer Channel that came up that was basically telling us a whole bunch of stuff about what the actual like what the styles meant. For example, I didn't know what a certain style was. I'd go and look at that and I'd be like, oh, okay, cool. Tons and tons of research. And then afterwards, yes, we are starting to get people from the industry to kind of come and work with us now that we have something that we can kind of show them. Because a lot of people do kind of go into it thinking, what is this? Is it basically just, Beersmith, but a video game version? And the answer is it's not, no. And so you have to kind of show them where that nuance is. We are starting to do that.
So something I really wanted to get from this podcast, like we said before, this is just stuff that me and Rob are interested in, mostly this podcast, increasingly so.
In summary,
what I really want to understand, as somebody, I took a break from computer gaming for about a decade. I just didn't play any after I went between going to university and basically Red Dead 2 being released to me going, I have to have that, which is probably quite a common story, I'd imagine. What's the actual process of the creation of a game? Because obviously, like Eren, you came in super late, I guess, because the art comes towards the end of the process. Is that right? Or
it kind of all works side and side. For the most part, the art 3D side of it will happen more towards the end. Or like mid to the end of production, but we have a whole thing of pre-production where we're deciding like the art style, the art direction. Sometimes you do a little bit of concepting there, a little bit of grey boxing to get a feel for the like environment stuff. If you have characters, you sort of go down that route. So art is involved a lot, and obviously programmers is equally as important on both sides of it, really. And I think sometimes people forget about all the stuff that goes into art before art happens. Mm-hmm. And it is a very long process of like references can take weeks to get enough for an entire game. And even still, I collect references now for everything that I do. So yeah, I would say art's in it for the long run.
You'll have to explain what a reference is.
Oh, so we'll just go out and be like, right, what do we want to make? What sort of style do we want to look at? Sometimes, for example, if you've got like a bit more of a stylized game, you'll go find other games that have a similar style that you want to match to. And you'd be like, right, okay, how did they do that? if you're lucky, you'll find somebody who's sort of made a texture that's like, hey, this is how I did this shader, or this is how I did this. And then in which case you can watch that and be like, okay, great. So now we have a building block to go off of. But it's basically just getting a visual, sort of like a mood board for the entire game that you want to go forward with. And that involves production, that involves design, that involves code, because obviously you have limitations, stuff like that. So it's a very all hands in sort of process from start to end, I would say. Peter might disagree. But
No, I completely agree. It's so obviously we're a small studio. The team is less than 20 people that's actually working on this. The team itself is the whole studio is like coming up on 52, 53 now, something like that. But there's less than 20 of us working on this thing, and so the way that indie games get made is very different to the way AAA games get made, or don't get made. End up getting
AAA. Does that just mean like the big releases?
So AAA is like, if you see it advertised on television, that's going to be a AAA game. So that's your Rockstar games like Red Dead and Grand Theft Auto. It's things like Cyberpunk. Those kinds of massive title, FIFA, Call of Duty.
They're the blockbuster kind of things.
The blockbuster, like, basically you just get out of the way of those games because they are huge. Like, they're the game that, the slightly more casual gamer is like, every year I get Call of Duty and I get FIFA, and that's the games I like. When you have people who are into the hobby of video gaming a little bit more, that's where you get into the realms of like what's sometimes called triple I, which is like bigger indie, or sometimes just small indie games and that kind of stuff. And there doesn't seem to be too much in the middle anymore. That kind of got gutted a little while ago. But in terms of indie stuff, we as a studio, we really love collaboration and actually working together. So every day we're actually meeting up in the mornings and we're talking about, this is what we've been doing, this is what we're going to be doing tomorrow, and we go, oh, can I help you out on this? Because a code solve for an art problem might save art 50, 60, 70 hours, and vice versa. Design needs to be around to kind of answer questions about just really silly things. Like, there'll be stuff like there'll be a question like, it'll be serious things for which are things like, do we use imperial or do we use metric? Because it's a global audience, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you use global and metric, do you have that baked into the actual physical objects, or do you only have that in like the user interface, which is kind of like the menus around the game? All the way to really, kind of, it sounds trivial, but they all kind of build up over time of things like, is this bird song that's playing in the background quite wholesome enough, or is it a bit too jarring? It's those kinds of collaborative decisions that allow small teams to kind of make really nice stuff together.
It must have been a nightmare in a brewing game, because even in the beer world, like, you get some breweries that talk in hectoliters, some in brewers' barrels, some will use centiliters, some will use milliliters. You've got your pints, you've got your half liters. Like, no one can decide. It's like, can we all just get together?
So at least the government's not muddying the water by saying, hey, you know what, you can use imperial, screw it.
Oh dear, yeah.
I work for a beer importer, and because we've traditionally worked with a lot of European breweries, we work in hectoliters.
Right.
Whereas a lot of the more traditional breweries from the UK work in brewers' barrels. And then just because Americans like to be different, they work in cases. So you're like trying to work out, they're like, we've sold 18,000 cases. And you're like, well, that's 24 bottles that are 355 mil.
Yeah, not 330. It's just...
I cannot work it out.
Yeah.
It is insane. So I even imagine, like, I know you said there that these details seem minor, but like, that's just an example of a measurement in beer, but there's so many other within beer, and then
and because of, obviously we're making a game for a global audience, right? So we do market research to figure out like where do craft beer fans who also happen to like games actually come from. We can actually target certain markets and go, okay, well, we should make the game for this in these languages. And so as soon as we get into the subject of things like measurements, you're immediately like, well, the answer is all of them. The answer has to be, to some degree, everybody needs to understand what's being talked about here, right? So, yeah, it's a really tricky set of challenges that games design is often troubled with. Things where in real life you just be like, oh, well, that'd just be an easy thing to sort out. And there's just never an easy answer in video games. There's always something that's just a little bit more complex than you might have originally thought it was.
So you mentioned in talking about AAA and III games that sort of there was a middle that have been sucked out. Is there sort of any sort of industry issues happening at the moment where, obviously in beer you have the macros versus the indies or whatever you have. Have you got a similar situation in gaming, or have you got, it's tough to make profit as a small indie because of the AAAs or despite the AAAs?
Do you want to take this, Eren?
Yeah, okay. So I think sort of from what I've seen, so obviously I'm quite relatively, in terms of length of time in the industry, I'm quite a new person. And in the time that I've sort of been in the industry, when I was studying, it was very much you could be indie, you could be AAA, but the thing is, everyone's starting to sort of merge into each other now, and I think it's getting to the point where there's a real sort of selection of different games, and you can almost always find something that you're going to be interested in as like an artist or a producer or a programmer. And I think there's a benefit of indie where you have such a tight creative team that everyone has an input. You can all do the sort of have a little, right, I made that decision at the end of the day. That was awesome. But obviously you have the inherent risk with indie that if a game flops, that can be enough to shut the studio. So you then have the opposite side of it with a AAA. You have stability. You're working on these huge titles, and especially as game developers, crediting in titles is a massive part of our jobs. It can really define the job you then will be able to get if, for example, you have a problem. So you have the two sides of the coin, and I think the problem with the mid-ground studios is what happened was they either outgrew being mid-size, or they had to downscale because they weren't being successful enough to maintain that sort of. You need the income at the end of the day. Unfortunately, we would all love to make creative things and never have to worry about paying our bills, but unfortunately we do. And I think that those sort of pressures kind of pushed people either to go fully indie and have that creative freedom, or go AAA and have the really nice stability. And I mean, obviously, I think most people grew up who are game developers now thinking, yeah, I want to make the next, I mean, for me it's Zelda. So, but I think that's probably where that sort of come from.
Over the last few years, we've become obsessed with homebrewing at the Craft Beer channel.
We have. I used to think it was only the professionals who could make great beer, but we've come to realise that it's not only achievable at home, but also much easier and more fun than I thought.
Yeah, people think homebrewing is hard to get into, but it's really not. You can start super basic, and there are some great resources and stores out there.
Absolutely, and that's why we're delighted that this podcast is sponsored by the Malt Miller.
Yeah, they've made getting into brewing so much easier for people at home. Even we've managed to make some amazing beer.
We have. Remember that time we impressed Verdon's head brewer with our hazy IPA, and Jamie Oliver with our red IPA, and brewed our own cask bitter?
Hell yeah, man. I wish we could make those beers again.
Well, we can, mate, because all our best homebrew recipes are available on the Malt Miller, along with loads of other great recipe kits.
And you can still make your own recipes, right?
Absolutely. We work with the Malt Miller because they have an incredible range of over 100 hop products, 150 malts, and 350 different yeasts. The exact same quality as what the professionals use, and they're all carefully stored and shipped on an overnight service for freshness.
So with all that, the only limit is how deep down the rabbit hole you want to go.
Exactly. You could just stick to making extract brews of your favourite beers, or build a full brewery in the backyard.
Who'd do a mad thing like that, Johnny?
No idea, but I bet they get all their stuff from the maltmiller.co.uk.
Games can are like bigger than the film industry, right? In many ways.
Yeah.
And how big are the teams then? If you're a team of say 20 people, 30 people working in this, how big is a team for a Call of Duty or a Red Dead?
Okay.
It can be thousands sometimes.
Yeah. So one of my favourite series is the Assassin's Creed series. So Ubisoft did a thing called 24/7 Dev, and what that is I think this was for Assassin's Creed Unity. I believe they had 5,000 people across the world on the single team making a single project. And by single team, I mean making a single product, I should say. 5 different teams across the world. And then what 24-hour dev is essentially follow the sun. So basically the French team the team in French Canada, so this would have been Montreal. They start work, they get up, and they look at all the bug reports and from the QA people, and they start working on those. They generate art assets. They do all that sort of stuff. That then goes over to they work and work and work and work and work, and just as Europe is waking up, that then means that they've got their QA team. So their QA team will look at all the work that the code team and the art team are putting in. They'll actually verify whether or not that stuff is actually working correctly, and that'll keep going, keep going. Then Asia wakes up. When Asia wakes up, the localization team starts to move in. They'll actually figure out, okay, can we translate all of these languages? Can we, maybe there'll be additional testing. Maybe there'll be some kind of ancillary development stuff like ITSM, which is like basically like how the computers work, like making sure everything's connected. Or maybe it will be a separate feature team out in Asia, like maybe they're just handling the multiplayer. And then obviously then America wakes up again and they get those bugs in and they start working. That happened for a number of years. I think Unity was in development for years and years and years. And it does scale up, so it'll begin with like a few people with an idea, and then it will get to 5,000 as we get towards the end of release. But that's how big that can go. I talked with somebody at Ubisoft, and they said that they had producers of producers. So that is like literally people who manage the people who manage the time. So that is, it's quite full on. And obviously you then end up with these things like the bigger the projects and the more distributed that you are, the more certainty that you need that you're making the right things, and the information gap gets wider and wider and wider, and that's why you end up with things like some of the problems in the industry that we have, like interminable crunch for years on end, projects just going nowhere, massive amounts of bugs, low quality but very, very high budgets, those kinds of things. When you miss those things, and that's why I always look at Ubisoft and think, in terms of production process, they're very, very good. Because that sort of stuff can happen really easily, and you do end up with, you mentioned Red Dead, for example, that massively blew up in the video games sphere as, people were getting divorced because they'd been working so many years, and Cyberpunk, the Cyberpunk team being told to crunch from, for 12, basically doing 12-month death marches. The fact that we have the phrase crunch, nobody calls it crunch outside of the games industry. It's always called overtime, right? Right? It's called overtime, but we have a specific phrase for it. We also have a specific phrase for... So in other industries, you'll have like industry experts or, that kind of thing. In the video games industry, we have veterans. And like, that's a very... Right. And that's like such a... That's so indicative of like sometimes how the video games industry can work. Luckily, Auroch doesn't work in that way, but very big studios will definitely do that kind of stuff. And
Eren, coming in as somebody young to this industry, do you look at that and does it scare you, or do you see that it's starting to change?
That's been a big part of sort of the past couple of years for me, because I think when I entered university, it was very much a just be prepared. That this could go massively.
So there were just warnings even before you get into it, right?
Yeah, tutors kind of give you a heads up, and they're like, "Oh, by the way, this might be a bit messy." Luckily, by the time that because I did a master's degree as well, by the time I got out of that and I was sort of moving into the industry, I am very beneficial to have an older sister who's also in the industry. And she sort of told me the red flags. She was like, right, okay, if they're asking for this sort of style stuff, maybe just skirt around that. Don't go for that company. And I think you kind of learn your own limitations and whether you're going to be happy with that. And so no, it doesn't scare me, but I could also massively see why it would be scary. And yeah, it's a weird one.
Is it a benefit of being an indie studio where the HR and the care and the knowledge of what you're putting your staff through it's right there in front of you, not over in Asia at a different time zone?
100%. You really need that sort of transparency between everyone. The second you lose that transparency, it creates a really horrible divide between everyone that is unnecessary. And a lot of people really, really want to get the best out of the game anyway. So you don't want to turn people against each other like that.
Is there a sense that, cause in beer, there's some pretty horrific stories of exploitation of workers and of underpaid workers, and a lot of the time the sort of reason is because people just feel exceptionally lucky to be working in that industry. Is that not necessarily something that an employer would say, but certainly what they're thinking when they're asking for the crunch time?
Yeah, 100%. To sort of put it into perspective, from my year of university, like my graduating year, I think there was maybe about 60 of us, and only 3 of us currently work in the industry.
Wow.
And that's not from lack of trying, and that's not from people being terrible artists or bad programmers. It is just one of those industries. It's a little bit of like, you have to be good at getting to know people, and then once that, because it's a high level of trust. There is a lot of trust that we put into each other in games, and that can be a really good thing, but it also can be really hard to sort of get into that inner circle. And I think that's getting better. That's definitely over time, networking events, and I think arguably the pandemic's really helped a lot of people, because we can do online events, which a lot of socially, people that don't like going to big social gatherings, this is so much easier. So I think we're sort of bridging that gap, but there is definitely that sort of, you're lucky to be here. And especially when you're a junior or somebody that's just starting out, it's like, hey, I got into this really big company, but I'm working like 50 hours a week and I'm barely getting paid.
I haven't seen my friends for a year and I'm now in debt. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a sense of, I think the pandemic thing, I think, is a really, really good point, actually, because it used to be like, well, how many different massive companies are there to support you? You're in the games industry. If you don't work here, where are you going to work? Because otherwise you're going to have to move house and do all that sort of stuff. And one of the things I've noticed about some of these bigger companies now is, oh, well, you can all work remotely now. And then suddenly this idea of like working hundreds of hours is like, well, I'm just gonna go, because the skills are in specialist supply. I don't have to be physically located in the same space, so I can demand better pay. I can demand better hours, work-life balance. I've seen a lot of people kind of move on and basically be like, well, if it's all going to be remote anyway, why am I working 60 hours when I can work 40 or 30 or whatever? Yeah.
Have the big industry or the AAA people as well, have they all adopted this working from home culture as well?
I think from people, sorry, not to butt in, from people I know who work in it, a lot of them have, yeah. It seems to be, there's a couple of jobs where it's kind of hard to work from home. So they obviously are starting to go back in. But from the most of like the UK side of things that I've seen, there is a definitely people who've been working from home a lot more. Yeah, for sure. And I think that stuff has that stuff has come about because obviously in the US, employment laws are way more challenging. We are very lucky when we talk about stability in AAA. Like, that's not a thing in the US. It's much more based on the Hollywood model, for example, of you get brought on to do 4 months of this and then you get sacked. Like that, and that's how that model works. You can't sustain a team of 5,000 for all of the time, right? So you just go, here you go, and then we go back down to the back to a lower amount. That doesn't really happen in the UK. Some people really want it to, but they can get in the bin. So that does happen. I would also say one of the things is that we've learned is that as people become more as people have longer careers in the games industry because they're not burning out, the actual average industry career length in the video games business is 5 years. And then you're out. That's
you might not even finish Red Dead 2 in those 5 years before you're like, I'm done with this thing.
Well, the joke always used to be like, I've only got 3 games in me. Which ones am I going to do? Like, right. And that's really bad, right? So the fact that we've got people now in the industry who are going on for longer and longer and longer and longer, our ways of working are maturing. So we're actually starting to pick up what the traditional software business has known for a really long time, and it's still unfortunately a little bit of that bedroom to billions way of working, where it's like, well, I made myself rich by doing X, by working every hour under the sun, so you will too. But as we continue to evolve and actually stop putting up with that stuff, I think we're starting to see things improve a bit.
Where do they end up going after their 3 years in the game industry? Is there a usual or obvious segue?
Yeah, banking apps, creative agencies, and they earn way more money and they have a much more easier life. Like it's
hilarious and depressing.
Yeah, super super bad, right? Yeah.
You know what, Eren, it sounds like it's all you ever wanted to do was design games and get into this industry, and then you got 3 years at it, and then you're like, I just want to work at Barclays and make sure that your money is on a nice display and makes a nice noise when you log in. Sweet.
What a bleak way of summing up the entry into
It sounds like they have started to realise that these talents are getting wasted, and
yeah, so that's exactly it. As a studio, we're actually signed up for something called Safe in Your Work. I think it's called Safe in Your Work or something like that. Basically, the studio doesn't work in that way. So we're very different to how a lot of the industry actually works. We don't do crunch. We don't do like that kind of thing. We have a very positive kind of uplifted environment where we actually enable our developers to take responsibility for their own work and their own lives, which is basically, you know, the way of working. And so, yeah, while there is a lot of doom and gloom there, there's definitely a load of studios now, including ours, which are just not putting up with that nonsense. And I think you're seeing them start to come up now.
And so to take it back to Brewmasters, like, you know, you got on these big games, you've got 5,000 people working for many years to produce something like Assassin's Creed or something like that. For you guys, if there's a team of 20, I'm presuming it's still years of work, but just for a smaller team and more as close to 9 to 5 as you guys can make it. So what's the process of that? So do you sit down, you have these creative meetings for 6 months, a year while you're finishing off other projects, and then slowly start to build it and bring people in?
So from obviously, Eren, you could talk to the art side of things, but from a general kind of meta structure of the way that the company, our company works, for example, we'll come up with, we call them 2 pages, where it'll just be, here's an idea for a game, and we go, oh, that's a really cool idea. And then we go and do some research. So we'll go and look at, like, is there actually a market for this? Is there, what kind of games do these people like? We'll actually do surveys. We'll do try and figure out whether or not we want to make a game along those lines. So Brewmaster actually started life as a 3-page Google Docs survey that was basically like, if we were going to make a game about beer, then would you want X, Y, and Z? And we got we got thousands of responses back, and that told us something about, oh, there's actually an audience here, right? So we test those ideas, because writing them down on paper is really cheap, whereas as soon as you start making that thing, that starts to become very, very expensive. You know, that's really, really pricey. And then if you have a publisher relationship, which we sort of still do, but sort of don't, we just recently got bought by Sumo. So we do still work with some publishers, sold out as a publisher for Brewmaster. Then basically the idea is that you pitch that idea and you say, hey, give us some money and we'll go and develop some of it. And then you can tell us whether or not we should keep making it. And then that's kind of how demo making works and pre-production works. You figure out whether or not you can do the rest of the project. And that's kind of that traditional kind of, it's kind of like almost like it's like a pitch for anything, right? It's like a pitch for any kind of work in that way. That's essentially the way that we would come up with idea generation, and then we would go over to like something like art, which is very, very challenging within that.
Yeah, I would say like from an art point of view, the first good couple months is just a lot of sort of throwing ideas about art styles. Inevitably they change constantly. And then what ends up happening is, like I was sort of saying before, you get all these references, you have a look at other games. Sometimes it helps to sort of, I don't know, I'm sure tons of artists do this. When I'm playing a game, I've kind of ruined them for myself, but I'll start breaking down the art style of games that I'm playing. Have a look at the sort of techniques they've used, stuff like that. So I think for art, a lot of it is that. And then you have all of the planning, where we work with like the producers and designers to sort of get an asset list, which is a list of everything that needs to be in the game, from 3D, 2D, UI, all this sort of stuff, all the requirements we have for each of those. Sometimes we'll go into priority. So you have things that are hero assets. So these are assets that normally the player will interact with or can get really close to, or is like really important to the story. These will be sort of prioritized over other assets, stuff like that. You try and plan for the time frame. It inevitably never works. You normally have sort of like a default backlog of things that are like, right, this is nice, we could have this, it'd be really cool, probably not going to have that. So a lot of that sort of beginning part is just that, and then as the development starts to pick up, obviously you get 3D artists, you get your 2D artists, and you just sort of go through that list and try and get it all done.
Do you continue with that list? Because obviously games have a benefit over, say, a film, because you can make a tweak once it's released, and that's going to save Cyberpunk, I'd imagine. But do you use that also to get through your wish list, and that's where some of the updates are?
Yeah, so what will happen is when you're getting to those points towards the end of the project where you're like, right, okay, this isn't going to happen, we'll then break down that list and say, okay, this was a nice to have. Is this sort of like a game defining nice to have? And then you can sort of reiterate. I think the main thing about game development is the entire process. You don't really have a linear step. It's more of a, we'll do this, we'll follow this linear idea, and then as we're going through it, we'll reiterate, we'll say, right, okay, this isn't working the way that we were hoping it would, or the art style isn't sort of coming together the way we were hoping it would. How do we now adjust this? That could be years into development that you'll do that, and you'll change it, and it will be completely fine. It will just be scary at the moment. It's just one of those sort of things.
Yeah, it's a controlled kind of chaos. It's called an agile methodology, basically. Like you can't know what's coming up in the future because you either don't know enough about what's required, or you don't know enough about the technology required to make it. So like every game, you're essentially reinventing the wheel constantly, right? Because obviously if you make a barrel in one game, an exploding barrel in first person shooter over here, this studio over here still needs to go and make that exploding barrel, right? Like if you're making two different first-person shooters with exploding barrels, you have to constantly reinvent the wheel in that way. And because tech's always moving forward, you can never quite know exactly how to do everything. It's why one of the phrases that you always know when you've got a professional developer on your hands, because if somebody says, could you just do X, Y, and Z? Every professional developer will go, like, hackles straight up. Like, okay. Because there's always putting a barrel in a game. Great example. So we've got barrels in the game, right? So cool. Can you interact with the barrel? Yes. All right. So what can you do with the barrel then? Okay. How is that visualized? What is the button that you press to interact with it? Does that conflict with any other buttons? Can you move the object? What does it need to look like? All of these. How many of them are there? Like all of these things is a response to, can you just put a barrel in? And because of that, you can't really plan for the future in kind of the same way. And then,
So does that explain why, despite there being so many Assassin's Creeds now, every single game has completely different controls? Drives me mad.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's so Unity was the one where they changed the entire engine, right? So they'd previously done Assassin's Creed 4, great game, and they decided, we'll just change all the technology. And as soon as that happened, as a developer, I was like, cool, well, this is going to be a real bad game then at launch, because like you're just making everything again at the same time, right? Whereas with those series like Call of Duty and FIFA and that kind of thing, the reason that they kind of all look the same is because to do them every year, you have to have that level of certainty of, I know that when I put in, I don't know, Beckham, Cantona, who's an up-to-date footballer, I don't know. Yeah, sure, good.
Very current,
Yeah, Beckham, sure. So, like, how do I put this person in? Well, it's the same way that you put in the previous, Peter Schmeichel. That kind of thing. So you can get that certainty when you're working with legacy tech in that way. But because of that, the games aren't looking better, or the physics aren't more realistic.
Big undertaking then when Assassin's Creed are like, we're just going to they changed the whole engine, and then the sort of wheels fall off it, and then was it quite a buggy game when it was released?
Yeah, it's exactly that. I mean, a good example for Dark Future. So we worked on a game called Dark Future, and we updated the game engine mid-development at one point because for just some various reason that we needed to do it. And when we did it, so it's a game with cars in that drive around on a road. When we did it, the car wheels literally fell off. And we were like, why is this happening? And we had no idea. So we had to. So whenever you make that, even if it's just a change from a version number, right, of the same version of something, there's always something that's potentially going to go wrong. And you would have thought, we'll just upgrade, right? Like when you update on a phone, it just works, right? No, all of these things can potentially go wrong because you don't know those things are going to go wrong in the first place. You can't quite plan.
When you say the wheels literally fell off, were they animated falling off? Like it was a physics thing in the game that was built in?
Like a clown car. Yeah, just fell off. Just why did that happen? I have no idea. Let's hopefully find out and fix it.
Just put some bolts on the wheel.
Oh, just put some bolts on the wheel.
There we go, he's done it. But I mean, that's bonkers because so you're creating this world, and then obviously the world starts to react in its own way that you don't necessarily have control of. Like with algorithms, where you build the algorithm, and then like YouTube don't know why some videos do well and some don't.
Right. Yeah, exactly that.
That's so weird.
Released then, and it's out in the public. How much are you still all working on it to sort of iron out these bugs and release the updates to fix everything? Is it still very much all hands on deck?
What? So for Brewmaster itself, so that game is still in active development. That game's not released yet. So that'll be coming out next year. So yeah, like we are absolutely all hands at the mast to get that thing kind of sorted. And then for our legacy games, yeah, we tend to keep them updated, and if there's a new platform and that kind of thing, we'll tend to keep them updated and that kind of thing. Again, we're making commercial art, so it really depends on how successful something is. We've got old games that they're fine, they're stable enough, and they just don't bring in any money anymore, in which case it's like you have to kind of weigh that up between like updating like a very old legacy game of ours and making sure that the brand new hotness is goes out the door as nicely as it can.
Seems to be quite a big market I've noticed online as well, for people trying to find the glitches and faults in games.
Yeah.
Because Johnny and I don't really think we're neither of us are huge gamers, but I've recently got a Nintendo Switch and have played a lot of Zelda, which I've actually blown me away. Like the game physics, everything about it. I've not played a console really since probably the Xbox about 10, 12 years ago. And it genuinely blew me away playing it. So I started to watch some videos, and like there's just a load of glitch videos, but the effort people go into to find a glitch is just like, you guys are crazy.
Yeah, because glitch hunting is a thing. There's a whole thing for it, and there's two reasons people do it, and one of them is just to see what you can do, especially if, like, for example, Breath of the Wild, there is some crazy stuff you can do with glitches.
Yeah.
But the other side of it is speed running. So a lot of glitch hunters will specifically go out to find these glitches to help speedrunners, which is why you end up, this is why games like for example Ocarina of Time you can do in like 10 minutes, or I don't even know what the time is now, but it's getting ridiculous because they've been around for so long. Those glitch hunters essentially can find all of the glitches.
Just speed running, like completion rate.
Just
stuff
like that,
as fast as possible.
Yeah,
that is hilarious.
Really interesting.
Yeah, and like the video I watched, it was really interesting, and they sort of break it down and explain it to someone like me that doesn't really understand it all, and it sort of starts to make sense. But when I was sort of getting into watching the video, I was like, you're insane. Like, this is taking you 2 hours to do, throwing imaginary spears at a wall.
Yeah, exactly.
But have you noticed people doing that with any of your games?
Yeah. So, I mean, like, when it basically, as soon as you have a game that has physics in it, it's going to happen. Like, you're trying anything that kind of destabilizes that physics environment is going to lead to some unintended consequences. And destabilizing it could be something as innocuous as like going from 60 frames a second to 20 frames a second. Like if you have some slowdown, for example, like the game starts to it doesn't have enough processing power in the hardware to be able to make the game run at the right speed that you need. The physics will go, okay, I'll take a back seat for a moment, because the computation just says, okay, we'll leave that for a moment. And because of that, yeah, you'll end up with some stuff along those lines. So again, I can talk smack about my own games because I was the producer on it. Dark Future had a bug in it whereby if you played it and you're on a very low end rig, I think it was, and you dropped a specific mine at a certain point in one of the levels, it would basically send you into the atmosphere. And that was great. And we had people like sharing screenshots and like, hey, I managed to shoot the moon, or whatever it was, and that's great. Now, those people are also the people who play your games for 1,200 hours. And, that's amazing. Like when you get that stuff, because it's like, you know what, fair enough. If you've put that many hours into one of our games, feel free to show us where we went wrong. Like, and I think it also sort of humanizes the games as well. I think that's one of the other things. Like, you see these big, glossy, beautiful games, and you think, wow, just amazing, pristine, So you just want to crack at them, don't you? You just want to see something kind of collapse and fall apart. I think that's a big part of the appeal.
I sort of to liken it to the beer world, and you see, the lads at the pub picking apart some person's beer that they've spent all this time doing, and you're like, you know what, go and brew your own beer.
Or seeing the breweries where somebody's mopping the ceiling, that kind of stuff.
But it does take so much time, effort, and energy to find these glitches. Like it genuinely blew my mind. So I was like, well, fair play. If you're gonna spend like 12 hours doing that, then you kind of deserve to call out the production company.
What about sort of in a similar vein? There's been a weird thing that's happened in the last, I don't know, maybe 15 years, but the professionalization of gaming. So actually, there are gamers now that earn money by winning tournaments and this sort of thing. Has that changed anything on the development side, or I guess probably the marketing side? It has. Is it a good thing for gaming that you can do it as a living?
I feel like this is probably a Peter question.
You reckon?
Yeah.
Okay. It's certainly something we've had to adapt to. You now talk about games that are streamable, so games that are deliberately made to be shown to other people, because that's now part of your kind of like marketing mix. Mm-hmm. So for example, one of the reasons that Nintendo put a whole bunch of really cool systems-based gameplay into Breath of the Wild is because it's really awesome to combine all of these different elements into a thing that you just didn't think would happen in the first place, and that's very shareable. That's something called a K factor, which is basically like how can you get something and make it very kind of mimetic? How can you make it spread? Well, if a few people see it, so you end up with these games that do that stuff. Simulation games, funnily enough, were a big part of that. A lot of these kind of silly, wacky, slightly degrading of humanity simulation games that are out there are kind of like horrible on purpose. So they're horrid to play because they're in Japan. There's a genre called shit game, and basically it's a game that's deliberately made to be bad. And the reason is there's something kind of beautiful about that in some ways. And some of these simulation games are maybe generously you could say that they were trying that. And streamers often, again, we talked about glitches and that kind of thing. They will play them because it's like, look at this terrible game, ha ha ha. And then people buy it for a joke and they do the same kind of stuff. So people have changed the way that they think about those games to make sure that happens. It also means that, and we've never done these, but like, for example, a short 2, maybe 3 hour based story game, well, if the entire appeal really is the story, you could just go and watch it on YouTube. And what that's done is that's shifted away a lot of that shorter form storytelling, because basically, why would you buy the game now if you can just watch your favorite streamer scream over the top of it? And absolutely, like the esports side of things, Farming Simulator has an esports league now. How quickly can you grow a carrot? Who knows? Clearly it's affecting absolutely everything, and it has also changed the kind of marketing mix of when you do PR. It's like you put things out to games journalists because they're not going to shift units necessarily, but because they're the arbiters of critical reception. Whereas if you really want to shift units, you get in front of influencers on your Instagram celebs, your Twitch streamers that stream for 8 hours a day, that kind of stuff. And those two things are equally valuable, but they have come about because players do have more and more and more access and are more and more interested in making things from their games, and sometimes that is money.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting because I think when the first reaction back in April came out to Brewmaster, a lot of people were sort of going like, how do you win? Or is it a homebrew competition? And stuff like this. And they wanted that gamification element. Sure. When you're making, you describe it sort of as a hobby game. It's a fun pastime. Is that a reaction against almost sort of the heavy gamification?
So, have you ever played Harvest Moon or Stardew Valley or Flight Sim or? But like, So the game does have like a win. Like you can complete the game. Like there is going to be a narrative. So and it's very very light. It's not Chaucer.
Bev, that was the end goal, is it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so
get sold out. Yeah,
exactly that. So there is that. So there is a sense of progression. You will get better at the game in a sense of like unlocking more equipment. But really, you'll get better at the game by learning how to brew beer, right? And these open games like Animal Crossing, which did phenomenally well last year, they are games that are kind of directionless, and they are about games that you move in your own direction because they're really about relaxing. They're not about beating a game. It feels like that's a throwover from kind of like the 80s and 90s arcades, right? Like lives and points and all that sort of stuff. Now we're seeing games that move into things like either games of service, which will just go on forever, or things that are much more about enjoying yourself and not having the constraints of having to defeat 1,000 enemies or that kind of thing. It's about like, I made a nice beer, or I took a cool photo of an animal, or I did whatever it was. Like I did this again. Like I know I keep going back to it, but like something like a Euro Truck Simulator, for example. It's I drove from Dover to some part of Germany to deliver all these goods. I set myself that goal and I did it. That's great. And a lot of there is definitely this push in games at the moment of games that do allow you to do that, and they tend to be kind of relaxing. And again, we deliberately made Brewmaster to be very very cozy and relaxing and chill. Like it's
It feels like even like the really big games that are very narrative led, like all the big sort of open world games, have also introduced that element, like in Red Dead the Online. Hunting, or Red Dead Online as well. It's just you can just exist in another plane for a bit. Is sort of the thinking of it, even if there is this really strong narrative. I think it's a really interesting thing in a world where everybody's pretty time poor, providing something where you have that hour and you don't necessarily want to feel stressed during it, right. Which is what quite a lot of games can sort of do. Like, what's the game where you cook?
That's in Breath of the Wild. You just cook your own.
You can just cook your own meals. There's a game that's Overcooked, right? Which me and my wife bought, thinking this will be a nice game that we can both play, rather than her just watching me play stuff. And I mean, it nearly came to divorce at some point. So like the level of stress in that game is incredible. Mm-hmm. And so we don't play it anymore because we're like, when I play a game, I want to relax. I don't want to feel like I'm in an actual kitchen screaming at my colleagues.
And the online that you mentioned about streaming games, it's something that's kind of, I suppose, confused me as I've been out of the gaming world for so long. But a lot of the most watched people on YouTube are game streamers, right? Mm-hmm. And my sister's said her son just watches people playing computer games. And she's like, I just don't get it. Like, he's got his computer here with games. I buy him. It costs him loads of money. And he just watches guys playing it. In different countries, and I don't know. Can you explain that to me? Like, why is it so popular?
I think so. Obviously, this is just sort of my take on it. Obviously, I think everyone sort of watches games for different reasons. Especially as I've got sort of older, I tend to find, obviously not for like like a kid. I tend to find the reason I watch them is because, one, I don't have the time to play the game myself. So I'm like, I just want to get this story. I want to, like, it's a franchise I like, but I don't love. I'll just do that. But I think when I was a kid, none of this stuff existed. So I'm not really, obviously, like, I was outdoors all the time and stuff like that. But I guess it must be the same as the reasons we used to watch, like, Saturday morning TV.
Yeah. And
stuff like that. It's just like an entertainment that's a tiny bit brain dead, so you can just kind of shut off whilst you're doing it. And I imagine it's almost where the internet's taking over the TV. It's just you can get that sort of quick, high octane entertainment, but just from a random guy online. And I guess maybe for some people it's where they can sort of experience those games without having, maybe they can't afford it, or maybe it's not available in their country, because that is a massive issue, especially with like Japanese games over here, stuff like that. So I guess there's tons of different reasons for why people do it, but I guess it's quite a cool thing to be able to watch. And I think especially for younger kids, it must be quite cool to watch somebody as a professional and be like, hey, look, I can do that. And like, I can grow up and be a streamer. I can grow up and be esports. You know, I think that must be quite a cool feeling.
I have watched, if you've heard of Lemmy before, I've watched him do driving sims for way too long. That's mainly because I find him very funny, but you should check it out, Johnny. Johnny's got a very scrolled up face, but Lemmy doing a driving sim and narrating it is...
I'm in. I just didn't know he did it. That was the screwed up face, and I was like, why did I not know that? Cool. Yeah. So we've just hit an hour. So I've just got one last question I wanted to ask both of you, because, you know, something the craft beer really struggles with is not having an easy way in, I guess. Like, Peter, you were very lucky you had a really helpful person in a bottle shop that sort of gave you 5 beers that would help. What games, you know, if you're a casual gamer like me and Rob with the Zelda, me with my Red Dead, and we're thinking there must be other games. Where would you look to sort of try and support some indie developers? What games have blown you both away?
Oh. That is a hard one.
That is hard.
It depends on what you're into. So one of the best things I've found is just sort of through the grapevine. Like, talk to people, find out what sort of games they've really enjoyed. So it was a phenomenon, and I just was behind it apparently. But Undertale, when that came out, I had no idea about any of it, and I was suggested to play it, and I was like, oh, it's okay, like, whatever. And everyone was like, just keep at it, just keep playing it, it will get better. And it did. And obviously then now I became like a really big fan of it. And I think the best way to find indie developers and indie games is, one, to have a look at local communities and stuff like that, because there is absolutely tons of people that just do this out of their bedrooms, and just supporting them is like a really great thing to do. But the other thing is listening to sort of the community around. So Twitter is quite a really good source of indie games, and you can kind of get a feel for what's coming up. And obviously Nintendo are really good for it, and I think Sony and Xbox do as well, where they'll have sort of like a spotlight, for example, in Nintendo Direct, stuff like that. They'll be like, hey, these are some of the indie games that we're about to announce. Brewmaster, obviously Sony did that. So it's kind of like you've got to put the feelers out there to find them. Mm-hmm. And they're not as advertised as things such as like Red Dead and, you know, stuff like that. But if you go looking for them, they're really easy to find. Mm-hmm. And it's just sort of going out there and trying to find them.
Yeah, I would definitely recommend going to, I would say, sort of more traditional video game criticism websites, like, you know, your Rock Paper Shotguns and your even things like IGN, which are massive places. You'll be able to see trailers and see, that kind of grabs me. I always like watching video reviews and to kind of get a 2 or 3 minute like feel of what the game is actually gonna be like. But there are definitely, a few games that I would say are definitely recommendations to kind of like, if you've been out of the thing for a while, that you can go and see, be like, oh, okay. Like, I would definitely go and if you're interested in games that don't have a purpose, I would definitely go and check out something like Stardew Valley, because it's a game that has just enough to kind of keep you sort of on the hook, but you find yourself like 5 to 10 hours in, like, why am I doing this? But then 100 hours in, you're like, why am I still doing this? And I think that's a really interesting way of doing things. I'd also say one really interesting avenue is something like the walking sim. So these kinds of narrative-focused games that are first person, and they just tell a short story. There's a really good one called Gone Home, which is available on basically everything. And that's a really interesting, feels slightly creepy. It's a really interesting story that kind of unveils itself over time. And then finally, like, I would say, go to your like Xbox dashboard or your PlayStation dashboard and just see what they're talking about, because there'll be something there that visually will just catch you, and you'll be able to see a few screens and go, oh, that sounds like my cup of tea. Or on the Switch, for example, don't go, good lord, do not go to current offers. But with the little notifications area, it will say, hey, these are the hot new games that are out this week, and Nintendo has done your job for you, basically, and gone, okay, yeah, there's a load of this rubbish. These are the ones that you want to be thinking about. The Nintendo console's really, really good, actually, for that. Their highlights that they do every week are really, really good, and really kind of flag up things that kind of look small and interesting.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you guys taking time to chat to us. I've learned so much about computer games in a very short space of time, and have mad respect for the amount of effort that goes into it. It's like building films where anything could happen, so you have to script for everything. It's terrifying. But yeah, thank you so much for that. I'm really looking forward to Brewmaster.
When's it out? When's the release date?
Next year. Let's say middle of next year ish, maybe. I'm sure I'm allowed to say that. Yes, about middle of next year.
Did that comment worry you?
Oh no. It's Peter. It's on Peter.
It's a double-edged sword, the producer title, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like, am I allowed to say these things? I guess so. Who knows?
Cool. Well, we'll be covering it on Craft Beer Channel and probably the Bubble as well when it comes out. So we'll go glitch hunting then.
Fantastic.
Let's talk about beer, Johnny. Let's talk about AVB. Let's talk about Imperial Stouts and Imbibe buyouts of wicked weed. Let's talk about beer. Let's talk about beer. Let's talk about beer. Let's talk about beer.
So that was a interview of Red Dead 2 proportions. That was a long one, but I just had so many questions.
So many questions. It kept on unraveling, and I was just like, oh my God. Like, it's such a vast industry. I think you said it in the intro, but these games, these AAA games that they're talking about are like way bigger than films. They make more money. They require way more staffing. When Peter was talking about how they don't sleep when they're creating the games, so like certain teams start off in America and they chase the sun. Like, that is bonkers.
Yeah, it's absolutely mad, and I think it's really easy in games to sort of assume that your journey is the only one that you could take, but they have to account for, the most chaotic force on this earth, which is humanity, and go like, well, they might just do this or that or that. And it's truly bonkers to think about the amount of A, design, but B, programming that then has to underpin that design.
And like storytelling, there's so many elements tie into making a game work.
Bloody actors! Like, I remember when I really got into Red Dead 2, and I started reading about the actors that had voiced it, because the performance of some of the people that act in it are just incredible. And you don't think about that. Like, you literally are making a movie, but it's a movie where you decide exactly what happens. So everything that's in the film industry happens, and then everything that's in the game industry has to happen, and then you put it into a box and sell it for 35 quid. I used to think games were expensive. Now
they're definitely more expensive than 35 quid.
I only buy from Kex or whatever it is, you see.
Yeah, you buy in the sale, which Peter suggested that we never do.
Yep. Oops. Cat out of the bag. So it was really interesting to hear about that sort of the it's not quite as pronounced, I don't think, as indie and sort of macro like it is in the beer world, but there's a definite, certainly in terms of worker rights and exploitations, there's a huge difference.
Yeah, and I do think there's like the titles as well, like they're a lot more obvious, and there are blockbusters in that respect.
Lots of sequels, prequels.
Yeah, whereas a lot of these indie games slip under the radar. They don't really have a marketing budget. They are for people that truly love gamings and love the story or the animation or the design. I was really interested to speak to Eren about the YouTube side of things, which, as you know, Johnny, something I always struggle to get my head around, but a lot of the most watched things on YouTube are just people playing games and filming themselves and commentating on it. And Eren sort of explained that sometimes you just don't have time to play the game, but you want to see the story and see the design, so you get other people to do it for you, and that does make more sense to me. I'm not saying it makes total sense, but it's amazing how much people must love these games that they just don't even necessarily want to be in the driving seat, pun intended. I mean, but they just want to see the stories and the designs and the gameplay.
It's not that different, I don't think, to what we do on the Craft Beer Channel, where we go to, these pretty niche, very small breweries in places where you might not ever visit, like Forester, Maine in Philadelphia. No disrespect to Philadelphia, it's a wonderful town, but not everybody's going to go to Philadelphia in their lives, so not everybody's going to go to Forester, Maine. But, still, that's a really successful video because of the beauty of the place, the story that they tell us, the yeast that comes from their cherry tree in the back garden and all this kind of stuff. So you can still, enjoy the experience that Brad and I had there vicariously through TV. And I guess it's kind of the same. If we're going to say it's a world that they've built in these games, then it kind of makes sense that you might want to experience it without actually being the person pushing the buttons or drinking the beer.
Yeah, well, and they do take a lot of time as well. My count on Breath of the Wild is 160 hours plus, because I think it stops telling you after that time.
It's like, you shouldn't have a record of this. Burn the tapes.
It's very depressing, and honestly, hours evaporate. It's pretty amazing.
I was the same with Red Dead. Like, I would play until like 2 a.m. without even noticing. I used to drive Heather, my wife, mad as well, because she really enjoyed the story and used to watch it with me. So if I played really late and she missed twists, she was livid. She was livid. It's like, you're gonna have to do it again. You need to go back and do that again. But yeah, well, the other thing. So the other thing, that it was again Eren that sort of blew our mind with this was the these games obviously can take 5-6 years to make, which means that how long are you at a company? Particularly if you're a contractor, and usually you won't see the end of the project, or even your career won't last as long as that game took to make.
I think people are so into the gaming industry, they absolutely love it, and it really is, it's a vocation to these people. It's all, all Eren ever wanted to do, and then they get into it, and they seem like they, certainly in the AAA sector, maybe don't get treated the best. When Peter mentioned that all good game developers only have 3 games in them because they can't really hack it anymore, and they end up going to work for Barclays to design their banking app. You're like, oh man,
yeah,
that's so sad.
It is so sad that you can have too much of something you love, and we definitely see that in the beer industry as well. So much burnout, particularly hospitality staff, salespeople. Less so beer writers, I think, but certainly beer bloggers, vloggers, Instagrammers. There's not as much reward as people think there is going to be out there. The beer or the game has to be the reward in and of itself, which is kind of outrageous when you think of it. That's not how people should be rewarded.
Yeah, like certainly in the beer world, there are the good times there, and it's very sociable, and you get to drink beer, but there's a lot of late nights, and there's a lot of early starts, and burning the candle at both ends, and a lot of people do burn out, and it sounds very similar in that gaming culture of just these long hours and expectation and deadlines that are so hard to meet, because these games are enormous, like absolutely vast, and it takes so many people and so many hours to get them finished and get them done right. You mentioned, was it Cyberpunk a few times in it, which was notorious that they didn't get it right.
Yeah.
They got it really wrong, and like big marketing budgets, a lot of people got it, and the game didn't work, and they were kind of dragged through the coals.
Yeah, and even though they didn't get it right, probably a lot of careers were ruined and mental health trashed in the making of something that didn't end up actually hitting the mark. Which,
can you imagine the panic?
Oh God.
A week after release, it's just like, we've got this glitch here, going through the list. It must have been manic in the sort of post-production edit.
And then to have people whose literal hobby is to go through trying to find errors as well. Like, when I put an article live on Good Beer Hunting, you always get a couple of emails going, there's a typo there. And it's the most infuriating thing. But to have that on the scale that it must be on Cyberpunk or Red Dead or something that big, or even a small game, particularly games with the depth that Auroch Digital make, like, the amount of tiny little errors that are probably there that most people won't ever experience. But there's one person just going, and that, and another thing, and another thing, and another thing.
That is big in the beer world as well, though.
Well, yeah, true. I'm one of those people. I get sent stuff, and then I email back my critique, and it's very rarely good, like, because, I don't want to just sing their praises. I want to be like, this could be better, this could be better. But yeah, probably I'm being scratched off many lists.
Who do you think you are to tell me?
The number of emails that have probably nearly been sent to me, and then they're like, no, okay, I'm not going to send that.
You're the gaming version of a glitcher.
Oh, God. Oh, God. Yeah, so, I'm really excited about Brewmaster. As a homebrew geek, it shouldn't make sense to me, but it really does, because I just... The thing with homebrew, particularly at the scale that I do it, which is with Grainfather, who are our sponsor, just to be clear, like this insane equipment, glycol chillers, conical fermenters, all-in-one systems. It's a huge undertaking to do it, and you're doing it in batches where it starts to get quite expensive, one-off costs and stuff like that. To have something where I can scratch that itch, have some fun, have some gamification in there, and learn stuff without having to make costly mistakes, I think is going to be a huge amount of fun. And I hope that the only thing I really hope that's in that game that we didn't really talk about is a risk element. Because obviously that is half the fun and the frustration of homebrew. The stuff when you get it right, it really matters. Yeah.
I do think it's amazing how many doors it will open as well for people that just sort of pick it up and start to play on it and get this sort of idea in their heads that they could do this at home, and hopefully it will be like a gateway for them to start experimenting and trying to make their own beer on their hob, or it will allow them to explore spirits and different other drinks as well, because the way you make beer is so similar to how so many other things are made. And as you said, it's not necessarily cheap making beer at home, and certainly it's very messy and it takes up a lot of space.
Mm-hmm.
I live in a one-bed flat in London, so I can't exactly be taking over my stoves with a 10-litre brew kit.
You say you can't, but I did it. I did it for many years, and now I've got a bit more space. Not a lot more space, a bit more space. But yeah, so I'm really excited about that game, and when it comes out, obviously, it's a great opportunity for the Craft Beer channel to morph into the world's biggest gaming YouTube channel, as I just endlessly play Brewmaster and talk about it and find the glitches.
You can be like Limmy.
Yeah.
In the driving sim. Johnny just brewing dippers every day.
Dipper every day. There you go. That's the name of the channel as well. A dipper a day.
We don't have a release date yet for Brewmaster, but we will keep you all informed as well, because we're very excited about having a go on it, and I'm sure a lot of you are too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can also heartily recommend their space game as well. I should know the name of the game before I launch
Spacey
into
Gamey,
that.
I think it's called.
Mars. Oh God, brain. Mars Horizon. Whew, is a lot of fun as well. And on YouTube, actually, there's some pretty cool stuff you can watch where they got what's the name of the British astronaut? Tim the astronaut, the British guy. He played the game with them, and it's a lot of fun to watch on YouTube. So give that a little look as well. I'll put a link to that in the show notes. Cool. That's all we have time for this week. Thank you so much to Eren and to Peter for their chat. That was one of my favourite episodes we've done. And yeah, watch out for the Craft Beer channel turning into a gaming channel. Woo! The Bubble and Friday 5pm podcasts are brought to you by the nerds behind YouTube's Craft Beer channel. You can watch over 400 mini documentaries at youtube.com/the Craft Beer channel. And if you love what we do, support us via Patreon and get access to merchandise and our amazing Discord forum, a positive and welcoming space for everyone who loves beer, food, and homebrewing. Love and beer.